Voidmage Gamer is now partnered with Flipside Gaming, so you can use the promo code on their website, all caps, Voidmage, to get 10% off all orders $10 or more. It's a great way that you can support both Flipside Gaming and Voidmage Gamer's channel. Also, until October 7th, all orders that use the promo code will be automatically entered to win a booster box of Guilds of Ravnica. Entries are limited 1 per person just to keep things fair, so be sure to check that out. Hello guys, what's up? Coming back at y'all with another video. This is going to be a top 10, or not really a top 10, but more or less just 10 cards that are pretty cheap, really inexpensive. Right out of the gate here from Guilds of Ravnica, you're going to see some rares, uncommon cards. If you're more of a budget player, you're going to love these cards. I think they're amazing and somewhat surprising. I think a lot of these cards could be more expensive than what they are, but this isn't going to be a speculation video. I think this is more or less just going to be a helpful video for those of you who are looking for cheaper cards and you don't want to have to go and get an Assassin's Trophy or anything that's super expensive. You know, that's $20 or more. I mean, that's kind of crazy. For Commander players in a singleton format, you want something that's inexpensive. So we're just going to get right on into it here. Number 10, we have Beast Whisperer. This is the one where whenever you cast a creature spell, you get to draw a card. Now, this isn't a primordial stage. This isn't anything like that where a creature entering the battlefield is going to get you to draw a card. That's a lot better, I would say, because there are ways that you can manipulate creatures entering the battlefield. That happens more often than just casting a creature, but you're still able to draw a card, which in green, you just want to keep the pressure on your opponents. You want to keep casting creatures. You want to keep finding more creatures from your deck. It really helps to speed your deck up, even though this is going to be a little bit slower, I would say, than just creature ETBs. It is cheaper than something like a Primordial Sage. If you're playing a creature heavy deck, though, I would definitely consider it. Number 9, we have Quasiduplicate. If you're a fan of the card Cackling Counterpart, this is basically like a Cackling Counterpart minus the instant speed, but with the jumpstart, you are able to use it for a lot less mana than the flashback of Cackling Counterpart, so there is a plus there. It's pretty much the same mana otherwise. There are a lot of decks that love getting token copies of cards. I think Quasiduplicate is going to fit in well with a lot of decks, and again, not an expensive card. And next card we have here is Amara, Soul of the Accord. A lot of the cards that you see here are going to be reprinted in those new dual decks. Amara, I don't believe, is going to be one of those reprinted ones, but she isn't going to be super expensive. She is still under $1, I believe. But what she does is pretty much give you token production just by tapping. So if you have anything that can fool around with tapping creatures, it doesn't necessarily have to be associated with combat, which is usually going to be the easiest way to tap down a creature just so you can get her trigger. You have certain things like Honor-Worn Shaku that can work out pretty well with that. Not a very complicated card, very linear, but in Celestia, getting creature tokens and then finding a way to pump them up is usually what you do anyway. And the next card we have here is a little weird, but it's Circuitous Root. I don't know if I pronounced that right. It's a weird card in Wizards of the Coast. They love giving us weird pronunciations. It's pretty much like an Explosive Vegetation. I would say it's arguably better because you can get gate cards. Yeah, Explosive Vegetation is good in decks where you aren't going to be playing any gate cards, but still, I think this is going to be just as good in certain decks where you don't mind playing them. They're decent budget options anyway, so if you're finding yourself playing a budget deck, you're likely going to be playing those guild gates. And hey, why not have a card that can get 2 of them out there? They're going to enter the battlefield tapped regardless, so getting them off of a card like this, I think, would speed up the process so that you don't have to draw into them later in the game. They're going to enter the battlefield tap then. Kind of useless mana. Next one we have here is Azoni Thousand-Eyed. She's actually going to be reprinted in sort of the dual decks that they have here, the guild kits, which is kind of a shame because already in the rare slot, not really a lot of value is going to be accumulated there, especially ones that are going to get reprinted in dual decks or any sort of equivalent. But what you have here is a very solid Golgari commander, or even if it's not going to be your commander, Azoni can still be a very powerful engine, gaining you life, drawing you cards for 2 mana, and sacrificing a creature. There are a ton of ways to synergize with that in Commander, so just keep in mind, under $1 for this awesome legendary creature. If you're looking for a budget Commander option, Azoni is definitely one for you. And I would argue she's definitely multifaceted compared to something like Amara, so there's a lot more ways that you can synergize with her. Next one we have is Bounty Agent. I love removing removal, and I love ways that you can remove with your creatures so that you don't have to be dependent on your instants and sorceries. Bounty Agent is very cool for Commander because it's legendary cards, so your opponent's commander's legendary creatures, they're fair game for a Bounty Agent. The only downside is that it's not going to be able to hit Planeswalkers, which there are some Planeswalker commanders. The good thing though is that most of them aren't going to be Planeswalkers. You can also hit enchantments and artifacts though, so you do have some versatility. Any way that you can constantly recur it, bring it back with something like a Sun Titan, I think it's definitely good removal. Not really something that's easy to counter. You have to be able to counter activated abilities, which most of your opponents are going to be expecting that type of removal out of something like an instant or a sorcery. Getting that off of your creatures is always good because it limits the ways that your opponents are able to respond. That's why I'm really a fan of Bounty Agent early on here. And again, like a lot of the other cards on this list, super cheap and kind of underrated. The next one we have is Midnight Reaper. This is actually one of my top 10 commander cards from Guilds of Ravnica. Kind of a surprise. I mean, it is under $1, kind of floating around that dollar range. It's pretty much like a Grim Haruspex. Ton of value. It is mandatory, which is the only reason why I think people wouldn't like it, but it's still card draw at the cost of life, which is something that Black does really well. And value in Commander is just amazing. You start off at 40 life, and there are a ton of ways that you can sacrifice creatures with your sack outlets, making something like this extremely valuable to you mid-late game. Giving yourself card advantage at the cost of creatures dying, losing some life, I think is really good in Black. And next we have Dawn of Hope. This card was insane for me in Limited, but I think it's going to be just as good in Commander. You have what is more important than the activated ability that you can pay to get a token. That's kind of expensive for the format, but the trigger of being able to pay some mana whenever you gain a life to draw a card, I think is really important. When you're struggling to get any sort of hand size mid to late game, you can easily just get a life gain trigger off of something like a Soul Warden, pay some mana, draw a card. In Commander, you're likely going to have a much larger mana base or accumulating a lot of mana, so your ability to just dump it all into this awesome mana sink, getting either tokens or card draw off of it, I think should be there. Pretty good value card. It's a 2 mana enchantment, super cheap. It's going to sit there on the field, not draw too much hate. Incredibly underrated right out of the gate. And the next card we have is Plague Crafter. If you were looking for a better Fleshbag Marauder, Merciless Executioner, you found it. It's 3 mana, not going to force you to put anything else into it than that 3 mana. Going to do pretty much the same exact thing with the addition of forcing your opponents to sacrifice a Planeswalker if they don't really have any creatures to sacrifice. And if they have a creature they really want, they can sacrifice a Planeswalker to save that creature. Most of the time though, they're going to save their Planeswalkers, but you force them to sacrifice a creature or Planeswalker. That's the important part there, which is something that Fleshbag and Merciless Executioner didn't do. And on top of that, if they're all out of those resources, anything in their hand is fair game. They're going to have to discard a card. This is why this card is so much better than Fleshbag Marauder and Merciless Executioner, because it hits your other opponent's resources for pretty much the same exact mana cost. The creature is absolutely nuts. Any deck that you're going to be playing Fleshbag Marauder in, this is going to be a must-have. If you were saving it for one slot in particular, you're probably going to be replacing it with a Plague Crafter. Absolutely brilliant card, and I love it when I see new Magic sets and you see basically updated or improved versions of previous cards. Plague Crafter is definitely one of them. Set them aside because you know you're going to be putting them into some of your decks. Very good card, especially if you're able to recur it constantly. There are so many decks that are able to do that effortlessly. Something like Marin of Clan Neltoth, even if your opponents don't have any creatures or any Planeswalkers to sacrifice, they're going to be discarding cards. Just insane. Which brings us to the last card, what I believe is probably the best card that is really inexpensive from this set, the uncommon Crush Contraband. 4 mana instant. You can choose one or both. You can exile a target artifact or an enchantment. So you have 2 modes. This is basically a better Return to Dust. I know with Return to Dust you can technically hit 2 artifacts or 2 enchantments, but you do have a restriction of sorcery speed versus instant speed on your turn or your opponent's turn. If you do it on your turn, you can hit 2 things. If you do it on an opponent's turn, you're going to have to settle for just one, With this, you don't have to settle. You can do it on your opponent's turn and hit 2 things, an artifact and an enchantment. Yeah, you do have to be able to hit 2 of those things in order to get both of those modes. But that's usually what you did anyway. And granted, going up against a heavy enchantment-based deck, this is going to be half useful. Same thing goes for an artifact-heavy deck. But in a multiplayer game, you're going up against multiple opponents. This is also an uncommon for 4 mana instant speed. If you don't have access to Return to Dust, this is easily just as good as a replacement. If you want to play both, I definitely don't think that's a bad idea. Very good cards here. But anyway, guys, hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think about these 10 budget cards, underrated cards, whatever you want to refer to them as. I think it's important that the newer players in the Commander format know about cheaper budget options. That way they don't end up spending money on something like an Assassin's Trophy when you have other good cards in here as well you can make a budget Commander deck with. But anyway, you guys let me know what you think about the video. You all have a wonderful day. Boy, you're signing off. See you all next video.